It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman. I am here at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, joined by the CEO and COO, Charles and Amanda Shepard. Thanks for being here again.
Hi, Kyle.
Hello.
This has been our art history kind of continuation, month by month. We're learning a little bit more about Catholic art especially. And what did you bring today to talk about?
We have a very interesting artist today, Francesco Albani. And I'll say maybe first that given the artists we're talking about, the Catholic Church has brought many of these artists to the forefront by giving enough support and commissions such that these people actually were motivated to train. Mm-hmm. And I'll also say that everybody we're talking about is a Catholic, which is fascinating too, because there's an awful lot of talent that we've covered so far and more to come. And Francesco is certainly among that talent. He had the good fortune to be born in Bologna, and the importance there is that the Pope at the time favored that city and had relatives in that city and wanted to make sure that great things were happening there. Uh-huh. So Francesco, born in 1578, into the right place at the right time. Father's a silk merchant and does very well and wants him to follow him into this silk business. And Francesco has no interest whatsoever.
So by the age of 12, Albani had become an apprentice to the Mannerist painter Denis Calvert, and then he met Guido Reni, which I'll have Charles talk to us a little bit more about Guido in a minute. But I wanted to talk about the style of Albani and the evolution of that style in terms of the church as well as art history. So Albani is known as a Baroque painter, and for anyone who has seen the Baldacchino at St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, that is an example of Baroque. Baroque is known for extravagant detail, lots of ornamentation, lots of movement. Your eye is always seeing something new and something fabulous and really meant to be awe-inspiring. Mm-hmm. And it's a result of an interesting trajectory, which was in response to the Middle Ages art. So Renaissance art was one of the first big responses to medieval art, which could be summed up basically as more flat, less detail, less realistic looking. And Renaissance was all about naturalism and portraying something as realistic as possible. Lots of wonderful shadows and detail, correct proportions. Looking at something was like looking at it in real life. And that was in stark contrast to the flatness of medieval art. So if Renaissance is about ideal beauty, exact proportions, naturalism, what flowed out from that was Mannerism, which was a little bit more about the intellectual interpretation of the real world. We find artists are distorting proportions a little bit, adding their own. Well, I think this should actually look like this, even though it looks like this in real life. So we're starting to get away from exact replicas of reality. And Mannerism arose about the same time as the Protestant Reformation. And we know that one of the key criticisms of the Catholic Church at the time by the Protestants was that we rely too much on icons and art and statues, and then these are graven images, mm-hmm. so to speak, and we really need to be getting these out of our churches and our homes and stop patronizing them. And so in response to that, the church said, we continue to believe in art and we continue to see it as a means of evangelization for our people because it's beautiful, it's awe-inspiring, it can teach us something.
Sure.
And so the church encouraged and patronized artists who worked in what is now known as the Baroque style, which is almost an exaggerated form of Renaissance. So it's much more naturalistic than Mannerism, but we see maybe figures are enhanced with more musculature, or they're rosier, or they're more robust, and they're moving a lot. We have a lot of flowing silks and linens, really dramatic, natural scenes. So there's a little bit more drama, a little bit more embellishment than the Renaissance, but it's not distorted like the Mannerists. And Albani, our friend today, was known as a Baroque painter.
Do you get more drama also with the light and dark?
Sure. So one of the paintings that I pulled for us to look at and talk about today is the baptism of Christ. And we see God, the Father, is depicted as an older man with a flowing white beard. And he's surrounded in a halo of light and cherubs in heaven. And there's dark clouds surrounding him and light coming down from the heaven. And that light is shining on Christ alone. And St. John the Baptist is more in the shadows. We see a little bit of John the Baptist illuminated, but the light is really dramatic on Christ. Christ is shown as a muscular, very robust man, and he's in a submissive pose, but his front leg is coming forward like he's planted with a lot of strength.
Well, and in the middle of the painting, the Holy Spirit takes the form of a dove, and in what they describe as a mysterious voice, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased," says the dove. And over time, abrasion had happened in the course of this painting, and the dove was hard to see, so restorations took place, because that's the most important moment of the whole painting. You can't leave that abraded in any way.
In this painting, Jesus and St. John the Baptist have an audience. We have children and angels pointing at the scene. You can almost hear the noise of the chatter and the people and maybe the wind blowing. But we have townspeople, we have families, children surrounding this scene. And I guess looking at this, there's a lot of sensory activity for the viewer, when maybe in the style of the Renaissance, we wouldn't have as much stimulation going on in a scene that we would have seen.
Well, and I think that's the right word to use here, too, because the church is urging these artists to give us stimulating, tingling kinds of sensations that would make us look more heavenly and feel more spiritual and really physically be moved. And when you visit these various sites to see these works, it doesn't matter what's on your mind at the time. You are going to have that kind of a reaction to it. It's breathtaking in a way that the Renaissance was beautiful, but it wasn't breathtaking.
So would this be an accurate comparison with the Last Supper, Da Vinci's Last Supper? They're all on one side of the table. It's like, here, pose for a picture, everybody. And everybody sits still and waits for the photographer to take a picture. Whereas this is an action picture, like a football game, and you just took a picture of the reception or something like that.
That's perfect, because on the one hand, the supper is realistic, the right people in the right places, and they're painted very well, but it's not alive, you know. And this stuff is alive all the time. You know, a column on a baptistry that probably would have been just a beautiful carved straight-on column now is spiraling up to heaven.
And I think we mentioned this in one of our shows previously, that we always need to remember that the artists were adding elements that would have been relevant to their time in history. If this was painted in, I think it was the 1600s.
1630 to 1635.
Right. So that was 1600 years after Christ. So naturally, the artist is including cultural symbols of his time. The silks and the dress of the people were probably more closely related to what the Italians were wearing at the time, rather than Christ's own people when he actually lived. So we need to remember that the artists were putting their own spin on it.
Yeah. We're talking with Charles and Amanda Shepard about some Baroque paintings, specifically this painting of the baptism of Jesus. What is it called?
The baptism of Christ.
Okay.
Right. This subject has been painted and sculpted over and over and over, and it's something that can be continually new for us as we see artists interpret it over the centuries.
Now, when we're talking about the patrons that are making this happen, is this people that are just giving generously to the church and saying, do whatever you want with it, and they decide to invest in art? Or is it people saying, we need more art, and I'm going to personally hire somebody to do this for my church, or I'm going to dog ear this, here's my donation, I want this to go to a nice painting?
The latter is more likely. Let's say somebody outside the church, but a wealthy family, certainly they're going to have the sense of obligation to bring their envelope from one Sunday, our Sunday visitor, in the form of that 1600s. But they're also, they want their family known. So they're going to either volunteer or accept when asked to, oh, certainly I'll help this bit of architecture, I'll add these paintings, and the family name would go along with that. So you're up in the ranks of the important people within that parish, so to speak.
Okay.
And at the same time, you have paintings such as this Baptism of Christ also being done for a non-church art collecting public, and it may be given later or it may not be. In the case of the Baptism of Christ, it's fascinating because we don't know who it was commissioned by initially, but not the church. And it got sold into a private collection of the first Prime Minister of Britain, and was at 10 Downing Street for a while, and then he built, I would call it a palace for himself, a very stately, gigantic home, and his art collection, including this painting, was in there. Then through time, got passed down as he died, and then somebody else died, and the great-grandson who inherits this is lamenting, if you can imagine. He's got this mansion that now needs repairs. He's got this art collection that he doesn't care for and didn't buy. So he sells the whole collection to Catherine the Great and lets the house go, and he complains that nobody left him enough.
So to put a capstone on that story, there are actually two versions of this painting that we can attribute to Albani. One was done around 1640, and that version is at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. And it was donated to the Hermitage in the 1700s. And then the one that we have been talking about for the most part is at the Museum of Fine Arts in Lyon, France. And that was done around 1630, 1635. So these paintings, although have Italian origins, they are all over Europe, and that's the story of so much of this art that was created around this time. Because
it's appreciated as art, not specifically appreciated as a religious icon. Like, people just are investing in it as something that's going to appreciate in value and for its beauty, not necessarily because they care about the church.
The two are intertwined. We mentioned earlier that this style of art was critical to the Counter-Reformation in continuing to patronize artists and perpetuate that art could serve a good in the church. And at the Council of Trent, the leaders remained committed to art and even renewed their requirement that artists make art that is religious in nature. So then we see this proliferation of religious art either commissioned by wealthy families or by the church itself.
To add to that point, I think that your first patrons, commissioners of the art, were probably looking at the church and the beautiful art in the church and thinking that my home could look as beautiful as that church. So they would indeed want a religious picture, a Catholic picture. And it reflects well on their wealth, but it reflects on their deep spiritual nature. Where it gets tricky is when you get involved with estates that just get sold off, and all of a sudden you have so much art out there. You have art dealers, because it's no longer just going to the church or just to the king. There's actual product out there. In fact, one art dealer who got a chance to buy this painting somewhere in between bought it along with a batch of other things and paid £150 for the painting and the frame. £140, sold the frame for £150, and he said, I'm not sure what to do with the painting. Now that's where there's a real disconnect between the spiritual nature of the art and the sales.
All right, well, again, we're out of time, but that your homework for today is to go and look up this painting, The Baptism of Christ by Albani. It's beautiful, and there's so many little details that you can just kind of dig into. And I love like the woman that's pointing, and like it's like she's telling her kid like, "Hey, check this out." She's holding her baby and like pointing it out. So check it out.
Albani has done so many scenes from the Gospels. This the tip of the iceberg. So if you look him up, you'll see a lot.
Okay, great. And also, what is going on in the month of November for Fort Wayne Museum of Art?
Sure. So we have an exhibition of guitars, the art and evolution of the guitar, medieval to metal. So if you're a music lover, you will enjoy this exhibition, and that is up through December.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Charles and Amanda Shepard. Again, check out fwmoa.org. Stop by the museum. Enjoy some art.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.